The city pulsed with light-flashing neon signs, honking cars, and hurried conversations blended into an endless symphony of motion. Among the sea of people moving through the streets, a lone figure sat behind a makeshift booth, arranging her artwork with careful, practiced hands. Emma had always been an artist, but now her paintings weren't just an expression of creativity. They were her lifeline. Each stroke of her brush was fueled by a desperate need to fight, to survive, to hold on to hope for just a little longer. The world around her moved fast, too fast for most to notice the quiet girl, wrapped in a worn-out jacket, her canvases propped up against a weathered folding table. Every passerby was a potential customer, yet most barely spared her a glance. She exhaled, watching a stream of people exit the cafe beside her, their laughter filling the chilly air. It was another slow night. The stack of unpaid medical bills at home weighed heavily on her mind, but she refused to let despair take over. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe someone would stop. Then, just as she was about to pack up, she noticed him. A man strolled down the sidewalk, moving at a slower pace than the crowd around him. He was dressed in dark jeans and a leather jacket, his hair falling in messy waves past his shoulders. Something about him seemed familiar, though Emma couldn't quite place it. She barely had time to process the thought before he paused, glancing at her paintings. And then, instead of walking past like everyone else, he turned and stepped toward her booth. Emma's heart pounded. Strangers sometimes stopped to admire her work, but few ever bought anything. This man, however, didn't just glance. He studied the paintings, his fingers lightly tracing the edges of the canvas. "Did you paint all of these?" he asked, his voice calm yet deeply curious. Emma nodded. "Yeah, they're all mine." He picked up a smaller painting. Quiet, intimate scene of a girl sitting on a park bench, a book in her lap, while the city lights shimmered around her. His gaze lingered on it longer than most. "The way you use light," he murmured. "It makes everything feel alive." Emma blinked, caught off guard. People rarely commented on her technique, let alone understood the emotions she tried to capture. "I like freezing moments," she admitted. "The world moves so fast. Sometimes I just want to slow it down, even if it's only on a canvas." A small smile tugged at the man's lips. He nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant. Then, without hesitation, he pulled out his wallet. "I'll take this one." Emma's breath hitched. Most people hesitated, asked for a discount, or told her they'd think about it. But not him. He was buying it without a second thought. As she carefully wrapped the painting, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she had seen him before. The shape of his face, the way he carried himself, it all felt so familiar. It wasn't until he turned to leave, the painting tucked under his arm, that it finally clicked. Her breath caught in her throat. She had just sold a painting to Keanu Reeves, and he had promised to come back tomorrow. Emma barely slept that night. After packing up her booth and trudging back to her small apartment, she collapsed onto the worn-out couch, staring at the ceiling. Her mind refused to settle. Keanu Reeves had bought one of her paintings. Keanu Reeves. It felt surreal. Had it really happened? Or was she just imagining it? Maybe the exhaustion and stress were finally getting to her. But now there was no mistaking the way he had looked at her artwork, how he had understood what she was trying to say, without her needing to explain. And then there was his last sentence before walking away. "I'll come back tomorrow." Why? That was the question looping endlessly in her mind. Most customers bought a piece, maybe offered a polite compliment, and then disappeared. But Keanu hadn't just been polite, he had been genuinely interested. Emma turned onto her side, clutching the thin blanket around her shoulders. The dim light from the street outside cast shifting shadows on the walls, flickering like the neon lights of the city. She had spent months sitting at that booth, trying to make enough to survive, struggling to pay for treatments, struggling to keep painting, struggling to hold on. Was it possible that things were finally starting to change? The next afternoon, Emma arrived at her usual spot earlier than usual, setting up her display with extra care. A crisp autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh coffee from the cafe next door, blending with the sharp tang of city exhaust. She adjusted her canvases, trying to steady her nerves. And then she saw him. Keanu Reeves, dressed much the same as the night before, dark jeans, a leather jacket, sunglasses tucked into the collar of his shirt. But this time, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood an older man, well-dressed in a tailored coat, his salt and pepper beard neatly trimmed. He carried a small notepad in one hand, the other resting casually in his pocket. Emma's stomach twisted with nerves. What was happening? Keanu stopped in front of her booth, arms crossed, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Hey, Emma," he said casually. She blinked. He remembered her name. Hi," she stammered. "How are you today?" Emma hesitated. It wasn't a question people usually asked her, at least not with real interest. But he was waiting for an honest answer. "I'm okay," she said. It wasn't entirely true, but it was the best she could offer. Keanu tilted his head slightly, observing her with that same quiet attentiveness from the night before. "I know yesterday was a medium day," he said. "Is today better or worse?" Emma let out a soft, surprised laugh. "Still medium, I guess." Keanu chuckled. "Let's see if we can change that." He gestured toward the men beside him. "This is David. He works in the art world curating, collecting." David extended a hand in greeting, offering a warm smile. "Keanu called me last night," he said. "Told me he came across an incredible artist on the street and that I needed to see your work." Emma's throat went dry. "You want to see my paintings?" David nodded. "I do. If Keanu says there's something special, I believe him." Emma barely breathed as David began, examining her canvases. He didn't just glance at them, like so many others. His gaze moved carefully across each brushstroke, lingering on the smallest details. He was studying them, absorbing them. After a long moment, he looked up. "Your colors are vibrant," he said. "But there's a deep melancholy in your work. Each painting feels like a story that words can't quite capture." Emma swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Keanu, standing beside him, smiled knowingly. "Told you," he said to David. David nodded. "Emma, I'd like to introduce your work to some people. Collectors, gallery owners." Her heart pounded. "Galleries?" she echoed. David shrugged. "I can't promise anything, but I think there's a market for what you do, and I'd like to help." Emma felt dizzy. For months, she had been fighting just to sell enough to afford treatment. She had long since abandoned the idea that her work could ever hang in a gallery, that anyone in the professional art world would ever care. And now, out of nowhere, someone was telling her that maybe, just maybe, she had a real chance. All because of Keanu. All because of Keanu. She turned to him, still trying to understand why he was doing this. As if reading her thoughts, he said simply, "I believe in people's talent, and I believe the right stories need to be told." A lump formed in Emma's throat. She wanted to say that she wasn't sure she deserved this, that there were better artists out there. But at the same time, she wanted to believe. So instead of pushing it away, instead of doubting, she took a deep breath and asked, "What do I need to do?" David smiled. "Keep painting. Let me take a few of your canvases and show them to the right people. And if this works out," he glanced at Keanu, who simply shrugged, "then we'll see what happens next." Emma hesitated only a moment before nodding. If this had happened a few weeks ago, she would have refused. If it had happened a few days ago, she would have doubted it. But now, standing on the cold pavement, surrounded by her paintings, with one of the most famous actors in the world, looking at her like she mattered, she realized something. Maybe she still had a chance. And Keanu Reeves was helping her find it. That night, Emma sat on the floor of her tiny apartment, surrounded by her canvases, trying to process everything that had happened. It felt unreal. Just a day ago, she had been worried about selling even a single painting to cover her treatment costs. Now, Keanu Reeves and an art expert were taking her work to collectors and galleries. She should have been celebrating. But deep down, a small, persistent voice whispered, "What if this doesn't work out?" Emma closed her eyes, trying to push the fear away. She couldn't let doubt creep in now. If Keanu believed in her, if David saw something in her work, then maybe, just maybe, she should try believing in it too. And then, the next day, everything began to change. When Emma arrived at her usual spot that afternoon, she felt a jolt of surprise when she saw Keanu already there, waiting for her. This time, he was alone, wearing the same dark jeans and leather jacket. He blended effortlessly into the crowd. But now, Emma knew exactly who he was. And the strangest part? He looked completely at ease, as if he wasn't one of the most recognizable movie stars in the world. She swallowed her nerves and approached. "You got here before me," she joked, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. Keanu smiled. "Had some free time." and I wanted to tell you some news." Emma's pulse quickened. "News?" He took off his sunglasses, tucking them into his jacket pocket. "David showed your paintings to a few people. They were very interested." Her heart pounded. "We have two possibilities," Keanu continued. Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Two?" Keanu nodded. "First, there's a gallery that wants to showcase some of your work next month. Not a full exhibition yet, but enough to get some attention." Emma blinked, trying to process what he had just said. A gallery wanted to feature her art. That was already more than she had ever dared to dream. But Keanu wasn't done. "And the second option?" she asked hesitantly. He tilted his head slightly, as if gauging her reaction before answering. "I have a friend who wants to buy some of your paintings." Emma felt the air leave her lungs. "Buy several?" Keanu grinned. "Yes, and not at a bargain price. He wants to pay what your art is actually worth." Emma's fingers curled around the edge of her table. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. A week ago, she had been struggling to sell a single painting. Now, someone wanted to purchase multiple pieces? For real money? Keanu watched her carefully. "So, what do you think?" Emma took a deep breath, her gaze shifting to her paintings, each one holding a piece of her soul. She had a choice to make. Accepting this meant stepping into something unknown, letting her art take a path she couldn't predict. But it also meant hope, and hope was something she'd almost forgotten how to hold on to. Finally, she met Keanu's gaze and smiled. "Let's do this." His grin widened. "Good choice." The big day arrived faster than Emma had expected. She stood outside the gallery entrance, staring at the invitation in her hands. Light in the City. The first exhibition of Emma Carter. The words looked surreal in print. Less than a month ago, she'd been trying to sell her paintings on the street, counting every penny to pay for her treatment. Now, her work was hanging under bright lights, surrounded by collectors, critics, and admirers. A nervous flutter twisted in her stomach, but she took a deep breath. She belonged here. For the first time, she truly believed it. As Emma stepped inside, she was stunned by the sight before her. The gallery was buzzing with life. Journalists snapped photos. Collectors whispered to each other as they studied her paintings. A group of local artists admired her technique. And in the middle of it all, her artwork hung proudly on the wall, stories of struggle, pain, and resilience, woven into every brushstroke. Then, across the room, she spotted him. Keanu stood near one of the gallery's pillars, watching everything with a quiet, satisfied smile. When their eyes met, he lifted a glass of champagne in her direction. Emma chuckled, weaving through the crowd to reach him. "So," she said, tilting her head playfully, "what do you think?" Keanu glanced around, arms crossed. "I'd say your art speaks for itself." Emma's chest warmed. "But if you need words," he added with a small smirk, "it's incredible, Emma." She exhaled, smiling. "This was only possible because of you." Keanu shook his head. "No, it was possible because you had the courage to accept what was already yours." She wanted to tell him how much this meant, how much he had changed her life. But before she could speak, David appeared beside them, holding up his phone. "Emma, you might want to see this," he said. She took the phone, scanning the screen. Social media was exploding. Photos from the exhibition had gone viral, shared by influencers, art blogs, and even a few celebrities who had caught wind of the young artist discovered by Keanu Reeves. But one particular message stood out among the flood of notifications. It was from a children's hospital. "Your paintings have brought so much inspiration to our young patients. Would you be willing to create something special for our oncology ward?" Emma felt her eyes sting. She turned to Keanu, who was already watching her reaction with a knowing smile. "What do you think?" he asked. She didn't need to think twice. "I think it's time to give back." Months later, Emma stood in the halls of the children's hospital, vibrant canvases in her arms, ready to bring color to the once sterile white walls. But this time, she wasn't painting to survive. She was painting to bring hope. Children gathered around, watching in awe as she transformed the space into something beautiful. Some even picked up brushes, laughing as they added their own strokes to the murals. And there, among them, Emma realized something. She wasn't just an artist. She was someone who could change lives through her work, just as Keanu had changed hers. And now, it was her turn to do the same for the world. The Children's Hospital Project changed everything for Emma. She had started painting the walls with the simple goal of brightening up the oncology ward. But something unexpected happened. Her work began to heal more than just the space. Children who had once been too weak to leave their beds now gathered around, watching her paint with wide, fascinated eyes. Nurses paused between rounds, admiring how the once sterile white walls transformed into a world of color and wonder. Parents, exhausted from sleepless nights, smiled as they saw their children engage with something other than their illness. And Emma? She had never felt so alive. For the first time in years, she wasn't painting just to survive. She was painting to give. Keanu visited the hospital one afternoon, quietly observing as Emma added the final touches to a sprawling mural. A golden sunrise stretching across the walls, blending into a field of wildflowers, with tiny figures of children playing beneath the endless sky. "You've created something beautiful here," he said, hands in his pockets. Emma, wiping a streak of blue paint from her cheek, turned to face him. "They created it with me," she admitted. "I've never seen so much joy come from simple brushstrokes." Keanu nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Then maybe that's where your next step is." Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" He gestured toward the mural, then toward the children gathered around, dipping their brushes into puddles of paint. "You started out painting for yourself, then you painted to survive. But now, you're painting with people. For people. Maybe that's what you were meant to do all along." Emma considered his words. Could she really make a career out of this? Out of using her art to help others? The idea settled deep in her heart, like a seed taking root. Later that evening, as she packed up her supplies, she noticed a little girl sitting quietly by the window, watching the city lights beyond the hospital walls. She had been one of the most withdrawn patients, rarely speaking, never participating in activities. Emma approached her gently. "Do you want to paint something?" she asked, holding out a small canvas. The girl hesitated before nodding. Slowly, carefully, she dipped a brush into the paint and began making delicate strokes across the canvas. Emma watched, amazed at the transformation happening before her eyes. It was in that moment that she knew this was her path. She wasn't just meant to create art. She was meant to share it, and she was just getting started. Emma's journey took a new turn in the weeks that followed. The success of her hospital project caught the attention of local charities, schools, and even city officials. She began receiving invitations to collaborate on community projects, murals in underfunded schools, workshops for children recovering from trauma, and even a proposal to paint a massive piece on the side of a city building. Her name was no longer just whispered in art circles. It was being spoken in places she never imagined. One afternoon, as she finished a mural at a youth center, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Emma Carter?" a deep voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Richard Coleman. I represent the Global Arts Initiative. We've been following your work, and we'd love to discuss an opportunity with you." Emma's breath caught. The Global Arts Initiative? They were an international organization dedicated to funding artists who created meaningful, impactful work in underserved communities. "We'd like to invite you to apply for a grant," Richard continued. "If accepted, you'd have the chance to travel, bring your art to different parts of the world, and use it to inspire change." Emma nearly dropped her phone. Travel? Expand her work beyond the city? She had spent so long just trying to survive that she had never allowed herself to dream this big. "Are you interested?" Richard asked. Emma took a deep breath, gripping the phone tightly. "Yes," she said. "I'm very interested." After hanging up, she sat down on the edge of the sidewalk, staring at the world moving around her. A few months ago, she had been selling paintings on the street, unsure if she would even live to see another year. Now, she had a future, a real one. Keanu had been right. Her art wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone it could reach. She pulled out her phone and sent him a message. "Emma, you won't believe what just happened." A few seconds later, a reply came in. "Keanu, try me." Emma smiled. She had no idea where this journey would take her next. But for the first time in her life, she couldn't wait to find out.